Time is running out for the government to oppose a challenge to its new regulations for managing COVID-19. AfriForum and public participation platform DSTV approached the Pretoria High Court with an application to have the rules declared unconstitutional and invalid. Government has until the end of business today to indicate if it plans to oppose this. For more on this, we're joined by Reiner Duvenage from AfriForum. Reiner, welcome to Daytime Update, and thank you for joining us. As AfriForum, together with DSTV, you have asked the Pretoria High Court to declare as unconstitutional and invalid the health regulations published in the Government Gazette by Health Minister Joe Phaahla. Can the minister decide whether or not masks are compulsory to wear outdoors?
Good afternoon, Katlego. Good afternoon to the viewers. Yes, as you mentioned, just to give the viewers some background, we are challenging the new health regulations that were implemented at the 11th hour when the temporary COVID-19 measures were just about due to expire. Those were the Disaster Act measures that were extended for 30 days. Government then implemented these new regulations that pertain to the wearing of masks, public gatherings, entering South Africa, as well as making COVID-19 a notifiable medical disease. Now, we argue that these measures or these regulations are ultra vires, which means that the Health Act was never intended for these for the Health Act to have such far-reaching consequences. We also argue that these regulations are irrational and therefore illegal, but also that the public participation process was not followed properly, because these regulations were also part of the more far-reaching health regulations that were published on the 15th of March, and they were open for commentary, and then the minister picked these or he implemented a certain amount of, or a certain number of those regulations, and the other ones have just been opened up for further commentary. So those are the grounds on which we and DSA with us, we oppose the regulations.
Now, as you've just mentioned, you have questioned the validity of the public participation that has been followed by the department before the regulations were implemented. Can you expand on why you find their public participation rather invalid?
Well, we argue that there should have been at least 3 months given for the public participation, and now the minister and the department extended some of the participation period for some of the regulations, but not for all of them, and they did implement the mask and the public gathering and the entering South Africa and the notifiable disease aspects of the regulations, and we argue that does not follow the public participation process properly. Also, we have to remember that the government received hundreds of thousands of comments on these regulations, and therefore it would have been very difficult for the government in such a short space of time to go through all these numerous and these mostly negative comments.
But we have a fifth wave looming, with COVID numbers rising exponentially. Do you think that implementing these regulations would assist South Africans in inculcating a preventative culture towards COVID-19, which seems is going to be with us for a very long time?
Well, we've reached a point now in the pandemic. We know that the numbers are on the rise, but we've reached a point in the pandemic with immunity, but also with the vaccine being available to everyone, that we have reached a level of immunity for us that there's no longer a disaster. The government admits it itself. It ended the state of disaster. So there can be no reason for the government to continue with measures afforded to it under the Disaster Management Act and then permanently enshrine those measures into permanent legislation. That is absolutely an abuse of power, and it just shows that the government is unwilling to relinquish the almost unbridled power afforded to it during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that was not the intention of the National Health Act. If we reach a stage, and I'm talking hypothetically, if we reach a stage where people are being hospitalized en masse again, which is unlikely, then we can think about maybe then reenacting the state of disaster. But we cannot have the possibility for the minister to enact these measures at a moment's notice, which the regulations they give them this power.
So why do you think the minister then just reenacted these? What do you think the thinking was behind this implementation?
Well, it's difficult for me to say what the thinking was. We do argue that the government is unwilling to relinquish the powers afforded to it during the COVID-19 pandemic. This makes it so easy for the government to implement these measures that it basically, there's no need to even go through the process of enacting a state of disaster. The government can just basically do as it pleases, and also we also have to remember that notifiable diseases, COVID-19 has been included, but there's no set list of diseases in the notifiable category. So what that means is that the government can arbitrarily change this list, and it can then obtain these powers to implement the measures.
Lastly, Reiner, should the courts then not grant your wish, what would be the next step for AfriForum?
Well, we would have to talk to our legal counsel and consider the next steps, but we feel very strongly about this court case. We feel that it's in the interest of the general public that the government should not have this unbridled and far-reaching power over people's lives, and the fact that there's no more state of disaster, there's no more ongoing disaster, therefore there should be no more powers afforded to the government in this regard. So we feel very strongly about this, and I'm sure after talking to our legal counsel, we will fight this matter to the highest possible court.
All right, Mr. Duvenage, thank you so much for your time on that. That is Reiner Duvenage, who is the Campaign Officer Strategy and Content at AfriForum, giving us their account where government is being given until the end of business today to oppose the AfriForum together with DSA in them approaching the Pretoria High Court in saying that the new regulations are unconstitutional and invalid.